Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Material Matters with Grant Gibson. I've done well over 100 shows now. However, for listeners who might be new to all this, the idea is I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material or technique with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. Rather than a single material, today I suspect I'll be talking about several with the New Delhi-based artist Bharti Kher. Bharti was brought up in England before moving to India, as I suspect we shall discover almost on a whim in the early 90s. And since then, she's established herself as a major player on the international art scene. Her work talks about women's place in society and the female body. There's a fascination with mythology and mixing the real with the magical. And she also has a profound interest in materials and found objects. In her pieces, she's melted down bangles, used saris, ceramic figures and cast with plaster. But she's probably best known for her work using bindis made from felt. And she'll be using bindis to create a huge piece on London's Southbank, which opens in September. Right now, she has a fascinating exhibition at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park entitled Bharti Kher Alchemies, which shows a huge range of work spanning from 2000 to 2004. Bharti, thank you very, very much for doing this. How are you?
I'm very well, Grant. Thanks so much for having me.
Was that introduction reasonably accurate?
Absolutely accurate. Thank you so much.
Great. I mean, it'd be great to know where you are. Now, I know you're in New Delhi, but whereabouts in the city are you? I'm looking across our screen. You're not in the studio at the moment, I take it.
I am not in the studio, unfortunately, this week. I had a little accident and I sort of sprained my foot, so I can't climb up the stairs for my studio. So I'm sort of stuck at home doing, I suppose, admin and watercolours.
How did you sprain your foot?
I was very excited to go back to the studio and start painting again. And I sort of ran in there at very early in the morning, quite joyfully ran up the stairs and missed a step.
Ouch.
It's annoying, but it happens.
Yeah. Mm. Well, let's pretend you're in your studio.
Yeah, let's do that.
And your foot is in perfect working order.
Absolutely. My studio is in Gurgaon.
Okay.
It is on the outskirts of Delhi. Me and my partner moved to Gurgaon many, many years ago, primarily because we make sculpture and we needed large studio spaces. The center of the city was just prohibitive in terms of prices and space. As you know, Delhi is a highly dense city of over 22 million people. So we moved to the outskirts slightly. So it's an hour out of the city and we live and we work in Gurgaon. We've been here for about 20 years.
Okay. We have a tradition on this podcast of asking our guests to kind of describe their studio workshop environment. What does your studio look like? Are you a tidy worker?
My current studio is a beautiful sort of brutalist building designed by a friend of mine in Bombay. And it was built about 12 years ago to specifications for a studio, a sculpture studio and a painting studio. And I'd say I work in an organized chaos. So there's a lot of stuff around, but I know where everything is. And I'm pretty tidy. I'm quite organized and I like to keep my workspaces clean, but sculpture is not a clean profession.
No.
So we have very separate spaces for the bindi paintings, which are downstairs in the basement. And then the first floor is sort of a big hall where I display finished works or bring works that are coming or being made so that I can just look at them and walk around them and then see where they need to go afterwards. And then outside we have sort of 5 outdoor areas, which is carpentry, painting, casting. And the top floor is me. So it's a pretty big studio and I have a great team. Most of them have been with me for about 15 to 20 years.
Okay. And how big is the team?
We're about 14 now.
Okay.
We was between about 14 and 20, but after past few years, it just sticks to the really core team who've been around for a really long time. And depending on projects and how what kind of production we're doing, we bring in other people to help or for short contractual works for maybe 6 months or something like that, depending on how we need to finish the work.
Right. And so the reason we're talking is, well, primarily your show at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, which I kind of stumbled into by chance, really. I was coming back from holiday and passing by, and I was completely intrigued by it. I mean, it covers your work, as we said in the intro, from 2000 to the present day. Why start at 2000?
When I was invited by Claire Lilly to do the exhibition at Yorkshire, firstly, it's really exciting for me because primarily I kind of look at my work as there are two sides of my practice, but I really enjoy making sculpture. When I started making sculpture in the late 90s, the first couple of years were just, I was really learning and I was teaching myself. I mean, I studied painting at Newcastle Polytechnic. And I always sort of say that India taught me how to make sculpture, or coming to India taught me how to make sculpture. And my technicians and just we learned to make sculpture together. And I think that I'd really started to look at the ready-made, and I was really transforming and looking at materials and transforming them, changing them, melting them, doing things around 99, 2000. And that's really when sculpture started kicking in. And if you look at the Deaf Room, for example, at Yorkshire Sculpture Park, that work actually was conceived in 2000. And the first drawings in my sketchbooks were from, 1999, 2000. And it took me about 14 years to actually, or 12 years to bring that work into fruition. So the reason I'd say 2000, because I make work, I make a lot of work at the same time in the studio. So there's a lot of things happening at the same time. And I sort of, I'm not really a chronological artist, so it's not something that I really think about because I start pieces and then I finish them sometimes many years later. I collect objects, they change, they come back they go away, they go for packing, they disappear in the studio. I move them away and then I bring them back after a few years when I think I'm ready to resolve them. So 2000 purely because that's when I started really making sculpture.
Making sculpture. Yeah. I mean, there are a series of 4 outdoor pieces, and then your show takes up the whole of the underground gallery, which are 3 not insignificantly sized rooms. It's entitled Alchemies. I mean, the obvious question is why?
I'd say the show is really about the magical possibilities of the self and the body. There's a body that we're given at birth, and I think that throughout our lives we travel with that. We experience and we cross axis, and we can move through space and time. And I think over the sort of 20 years of my practice as a sculptor, I really looked at the formalities of what is the body from the inside, from the outside, the cast body, the memory of the body, how stories attach themselves to bodies, how narratives describe our past and our present. How does this continuation of the future, how does it manifest through objects? And how mythology plays this huge role in the way that we look at narrative and we look at stories and we look at ourselves and our histories and our past.
The interest in mythology, since you mentioned it, where did that sprout from? Was that from arriving in India, or was that something you were interested in while you were still in the UK?
At school in the UK, I had a really incredible art teacher. I think that I was looking at a lot of figurative work from a very young age because he was, that's what he was interested. And the way to teach us drawing was often through the works of other people. And I'd say somebody like, myth and narrative, somebody like William Blake was a really important part of me, of my education growing up. I mean, he had a room full of volumes of works that he referred to whilst he was teaching us drawing. And I have so many favorite Blake works, but say, for example, Dante's Divine Comedy, it really showed me that something other was possible in the way that narrative, myth, and physiologies could be described. So if you look at something like Blake, he drew air, he drew fire, he drew water, he drew ether, he was able to convey a loneliness, rage, all these emotions through line. I'd say like in a period of, I don't know, what is it, 3 or 4 or a year or so, he made 102 drawings, died while he was making the Divine Comedy. But I think this idea of telling stories through the human form, and this idea of metaphor being a very strong component. I think I was looking at a lot of Goya, Velázquez, a lot of sort of Renaissance painters, and we were taught. I do think about my art teacher a lot, actually, and I think that he was able to teach or show me how to see, in fact, not just making, but through this idea of poetry, reading, art, image making, but also more important than any of that, I suppose, was he taught me to not be afraid of material.
Mm. And I'm going to bring this back to the show. Talking about materials, there are some fascinating uses of found objects in the show. In the first room, you have a piece entitled The Hot Winds That Blow from the West, which I think was created in 2011. It's a large cube made from old radiators that you had shipped from the US to India. It's kind of architectural in scale. What was it about the radiators you enjoyed?
I found these old radiators on eBay in about 2007, and I sourced them from the US, I think in Michigan, and I shipped them to India. I mean, at first, when I brought them to the studio, I mean, it was literally 5 tons of cast iron folly coming across from America all the way to India, and I had no idea what I was going to do with them, except that I was really interested in the form. And I think also just that kind of minimalist structure, something that had the potential to heat when I was sitting in the Delhi summer in 46 degrees. There was a kind of irony, a pathos about them that I just thought, I'm going to be able to do something with this. So when I started stacking them together and removing them from sort of this idea of their domestic function, they became redundant and sort of decaying, and they look like old animal carcasses, like with their ribs exposed. You know, I just kept going backwards and forwards. It's like, what can material do for the work? Where can it take an idea? How far can you push the same object if you repeat it again and again? And repetition is something that I do quite often in my work, as you've seen, that if I stack things that are repeating themselves, can I create a story? Can I create a narrative? Can I make a politic about sort of changing power dynamics? Because as I started to title the works, and I thought about this idea of the winds of change and how these defunct radiators had come over to India, and how from India I was sending them back to Europe. And they were redundant now. And I remember just writing, like, the winds of change now are blowing from the West are no longer as strong or reliable as they were. Other voices are sort of changing the landscape. And then this creates a certain uncertainty, political uncertainty, but also a flux in the work. At some level, of course, my British upbringing, I mean, England is full of follies all over the place. And I think there is a certain element of the folly object, which I really enjoy.
Interesting. So in other words, the material or the object came before the concept?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that is intuitive. I'm a big collector of objects. I like the idea that objects have inherent narratives. They carry histories of their own. I can take an object that has a frequency or a vibration of its own. I can tap into that, and then it can be transformed into something else, and it creates its own life. But you know, there's 2 parts to that. One, objects have their own inherent narrative. And the second part is when I add things onto it, that it creates its own mythology. So you're kind of like, you're 4 steps forward, 2 steps back all the time. It's this constant push and pull between mythology or narrative and meaning. And there's a lot of scope to sort of play. And I think I've just found it's a tool for me to be able to go places that I maybe hadn't thought of before. A lot of things sit in the studio for a really long time, and I look at them and I look at them and I look at them and I ask them, okay, what do you want to be? Where are you going? Tell me what you are. I don't know what you are. So you trust the object to tell you.
I mean, that's really interesting. That's kind of like in the architecture world, that's like Louis Kahn asking a brick what it wants to be, very famously. I'm very intrigued by your use of bangles in the show, because there are 2 quite contrasting ways that you used the same object, if you like. One, which is the death room, which you've just talked about, a chamber where you melted the bangles down and it became dark bricks fundamentally and created a chamber of them, I guess, which commemorates the death of women in some riots that happened in 2002. And it feels like a hugely reflective and solemn piece. I guess it's the notion that these bangles normally rattle and all of a sudden that they're very silent. But then you take the same found object, the same material, and turn it into something entirely different with bloodline that extends overhead in the Yorkshire Sculpture Park in the concourse. It's 50 metres long, kind of a continuous line of red and black bangles lit from within, which feels rather celebratory.
I think that the pathos of the object is also really interesting, that the contradiction of a thing that can be one thing and the other. These are realities in the way that we live our lives too. We are not singular in any shape or form, and objects aren't either. So with something like the Deaf Room, the work was in response, yes, to the riots and it's a very somber piece, but it's also in some ways a homage to the silencing of the female voice throughout history, but also just in the way that the object can somehow create a chamber for you to reflect. It's 10 tons of glass bangles melted down into bricks. I think the start of the project was, by the time we got it going in 2002, by the time we finished it, because nobody wanted to do the project, I got quite a few 2 or 3 manufacturers. In fact, 2 of them gave up because we were just losing so many bricks. There was just so much wastage. But you just kept going, and we kept going. And eventually I was like, I'm going to finish this project. And we did it. But I think Bloodline came into being at the same time, because when I start to play with a material, I push it until something that I don't know, I use this expression, I exhaust the object. It's something that it's almost like a practice. I will draw it. I will stack it. I'll burn it. I'll break it. I'll make it something else. I'll create an object with it. I'll turn it. I'll add it with some other things. And you just keep pushing the object to do what it's not really supposed to do. And then something opens, something cracks, something, you find a space within the object in the negative space of the object sometimes that creates an unusual or unrecognizable part of the work itself or of the object itself. So with Bloodlines, it was really so simple. You just stack them. I originally made that work for a building that was going to be knocked down in Bombay. And I was making, again, in the same way that I was, the Deaf Room is a homage to the female voice. The first Bloodline was a homage to the building that was then subsequently knocked down. And I was just creating a bloodline. I was saying, this is the artery of a building. And I've been able to remake that work quite a few times now in different locations, because it's also a way for me to connect metaphorically and wrap a building to say top to bottom, left to right, follow the line, and we kind of somehow enclose the space. It's quite poetic in some ways. It's like an artery.
Yeah, you've described it as a spine as well, which I kind of like.
Yeah.
But tell me, with the bangles, was there a moment where you saw these bangles and went, yes, I'm gonna collect them and do I don't know what with them? Just on a very practical level, yeah. Yeah,
no, I think with that work, I don't think there's a specific way that I work I think when I went to that building, I was on a residency, a 3 to 2.5 week residency in Bombay. I was quite young, and it was one of my first projects. And you're not given there's not a lot of budget, and there's not a lot of time, and you respond to the space. So I do like to respond to spaces. I mean, every project that I do, including the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, I respond to the history of the space, or the dimensions of the room, or the feeling, or the kind of volume, or how I want to make that room sing. What do I need to do to create a dynamic in this specific room? It's not just you put your work in there, and some works are definitely taken out and some works are definitely put in because the space needs them. So Bloodline was created that way. It was made in response I thought, well, it was really, it was interesting. There was a lady on the top floor. There was all these residency artists on first floor and second floor. And there was a lady who still lived in the house on the third floor. And she would always keep her floor really dark. And because I think the house was just falling apart. And I thought, I wonder if we could just make a light that went all the way from the bottom to the top. And the work was just left there. So I don't know if she used it or not, but she may have done.
Your work, it seems to me to be incredibly eclectic. I mean, you've said in the past that putting your work together can be confusing. But there are some threads that run through it, and we touched on this in the intro: a profound interest in the female body, love of mythology, mixing the real and the magical, fascination with the role of women in society and the way that they dress, particularly in India, I guess. And as well as the bangles, you've done a series of saris, which you coated in resin. Your mother ran a sari shop in London. I'm wondering if there's some relationship between that work and your mother.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my father was a textile manufacturer and my mother had her sari shop. So fabrics and textiles has been very much part of our life growing up. But also my mother was an amazing seamstress. Sometimes when you make, there's memory in the way that you connect with your own body. So sounds are really important. Bioacoustic sound. How do you record sound in your body? How is that recorded as memory? So I always remember growing up and hearing the sound of tearing fabric. It's a beautiful sound. Or my mother just like doing yards of fabric and tearing it because she was always, she was always cutting, and we used to work in the shop. I used to work in her shop on Saturday afternoons. And it was mostly for Asian women would come in and buy their fabrics to make their salwar kameez and all their clothes. But I mean, also other people would come in and she would have rolls and reams of fabric. So yeah, also I'd say the way that I use color certainly is influenced by that. But I would spend afternoons sorting out all her dupattas into color coordinations from white to yellow. But then every now and again, I'd mix them up and make them and ruin it all for her. Yeah.
Was that to annoy her?
No, it was just because I liked color.
Okay.
Yeah, I like color. I thought, green goes with pink. It looks good. And you should put yellow. These are three really good colors. And maybe somebody will see that and say, yeah, this is a great outfit.
Well, fair enough. The most obvious feature that runs through your work is the bindi. I mean, you started working with bindis in 95, 96.
Yeah.
What does it signify in Indian culture? And how has that meaning changed in recent times, I wonder?
Yeah, I mean, the bindi works have been, they are a representation for me of the third eye. This is the seat of your consciousness. The way that I began the works and the way that I continued to make them obviously changed over 20 years. I started working with them just because I was interested in the ready-made. It was a way for me to connect in a country where I didn't have a language that I was fluent in yet. And I was looking to see what was out there and how could I talk about things that already had something, because I felt in some ways myself that I wasn't fluent in attaching myself culturally to very specific things. But the works for me have now become a form of collage, and I've been drawing with them. So they're sort of singular cells and circles. They're about the microcosmic, the macrocosmic, the body inside, the body outside, and a way to talk about the things maybe that we don't know about, the unconscious matters of the spirit, maybe as metaphor. Also to talk about the body and to talk about the potential of the body again. What is your seat of consciousness? What does it mean to be able to see and not see? They can be about your memory, about your DNA. They're as much about intercellular body as there are about sort of dark matter. And I go backwards and forwards. But they're also conscious and they're also slightly unconscious because they're the sum of so many parts of the studio coming together. They sort of link all my works together. I've also looked at art history. Of course, they call to like my love of minimalism and, Bridget Riley, Agnes Martin, Solowit, and, even the pixelation of early Impressionism or pop art, Lichtenstein, Stella. But they're also really resolutely close to the language of Indian tribal art and Tibetan mandalas and Tantra. And even if you look at Aborigine, or even if you look at the early cave drawings from this, from the Stone Age, stuff that paleontologists, 40,000 years ago, where people were pixelating on cave walls. There's something intrinsic about the circle, which is it is a fundamental, and it's a cellular structure, and somehow just it just somehow just works for. It's just something that it was a language that I sort of realized that I just created my own language after many years of just practicing. I realized that I just realized that this was a language I'd created for myself and my own work. And it's a kind of representation. It's a sign. And they're as much about code and language and poetry as they are about their original meaning, I suppose. And there's an energy to the works, which I think that's the part I enjoy the most.
I guess a lot of what you have just talked about is encapsulated in this series called Virus that you started in 2010 and will conclude in 2039. It's a wall-based spiral of bindis, which you've described as being a piece that contains meanings such as a vortex, it's a peephole, an entrance, an exit, it's the abyss, it's a lot of things.
Yeah, because a spiral is a lot of things. A spiral is the beginning and the end and everything in between. So, I mean, Virus is a project I conceived in 2008. I kind of wanted the idea that you can make your own bindi painting, but you can make your own work, like a kind of silhouette drawing on the wall. But because I'm not a minimalist, as you can see, in any sort of shape or form, I had to connect it with something that was really also about my interests in paleontology, anthropology, science, space, contemporary political culture, art, but also myself, my family. So I created a kind of timeline every year where I sort of did a future timeline. In 2010, I sat down for a couple of months. It took me a long time and sort of thought, well, let's see what predictions will be like till 2039. I kind of also wanted to traverse time with myself to be able to make a work that takes me to when I'm 70, because I started the work when I was 40. And so I just thought, at least if I'm still here, if you're still here, if we are still here, then I'll see you when I'm 70. But it's as much a note to myself as it is a note to the world out there, I suppose. And every year I make a virus in some place or some space. The years that I've not been able to show, we don't make it. Or what's quite interesting is I have now started to go back in time. So I can jump axis, which is something that I really like. So I could decide I want to do 2010 and I'm just going to exhibit it. And then I can feel like I can move through space and time, just metaphorically, of course.
But the bindi will also be the central motif of the installation you're doing on the Southbank that's going to open middle of September. What can visitors expect to see, Bharti?
So Target Queen is a work that I first made in, I think, 2010. It's a mural and they are supersized bindis because scale is also something that I'm really interested in. So when you look at the bindi works that I make in the studio and generally show outside, the bindis are micro. They're very small, but there's many of them. And this idea of how there is many, or you experience many in the scale of your own body, becomes kind of very insular, almost cell-like. Whereas when you start to scale them up, now the bindis are 3 meters wide, and this seat of consciousness, this I now is the goddess. She is that scale. So suddenly you've gone from something very small to something that is monumentally large. You're reaching now into the cosmos because her eye is just here between her eyes, and this is now 3 meters. So it's sort of this, the Hayward is like this very strong brutalist building.
Yes, a lot of concrete.
Yeah, I felt like it just needed to be softened slightly. It needed a kind of feminine energy. I was really excited. I'm really excited about this project.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. This is just to remind you that the Material Matters Fair runs from the 18th to the 21st of September at Barge House, Oxo Tower Wharf. There's going to be loads to see, including an installation on the future of textiles from Biotech's Futures. Sanne Visser will be creating a hairdressers where visitors can have a free haircut and then watch the waste hair being spun and turned into rope. Studio Tip will be using construction waste to transform our entrance. Transport expert Priestman Good is our design studio of the year. Hydro will be doing amazing things with scrap aluminium. A collaboration between the architect and designer T.P. Bennett and the furniture practice looks at how materials are affecting the contract design world, with brands including Mark and Bisley, Modus, ARPA, Norman Copenhagen, Chimera and SAS International, Fredericia and many, many more. And there'll be designers and makers working in everything from roots and mud to mycelium and orange peel. Oh, and there are talks too from the likes of Mark Mierdovnik, Caroline Till and Jonathan Smales off the podcast and loads of others in a space created with our official acoustic partner, Woven Image. It's all very exciting. The event is free for trade, but you must, and I repeat, must register in advance. The link is in the show notes. See you soon. Breaking things and piecing them back together in very different ways also seems to be an important element of your practice. You've talked about it briefly. The bronze statues outside are based on ceramic figures, Golu dolls, I hope I pronounced that correctly, that you break for your series called Intermediaries. Breaking stuff, why is that important?
I think it's something that I've been doing for for the longest time. I think it started right back in the art room at school, actually. Not necessarily breaking, but understanding that negative space is a really powerful way to describe presence. And I remember a very particular art lesson where we were asked to draw a still life. And we all sort of got in there and carried on drawing our still lifes. And no, wrong. You're not drawing the still life. But this is going back to the Blake as well. What do you draw that's around the work? So I realized what my art teacher was telling me was, Martin Shaw at that time, he said, I don't want you to just draw what you see. You have to draw what's around the object. So I think what I understood then, and it was a really important lesson for me, that the negative space describes the object itself, that everything around the table is also the table, and that space can also be experienced, space can be drawn. It can be energies around objects are really important. And then that whole way of looking at an object then includes the inside of the object, because the energy inside an object is equally as dynamic as outside. So sometimes when an object is stuck, or when I don't know what to do with it, it's almost like a child with a toy. You just open it and see what's happening inside. And that's often enough just to activate it, to allow the object to become more than itself, to be able to allow the object to transform and become more than its own potential. And then for me, that gets really exciting.
It's interesting because you normally assume that breaking things is quite a destructive act, but obviously it's quite the opposite. The other thing I was interested in was there's a moment in the show where you don't break something, you crush something, you crush an ambulance. Why did you decide to crush an ambulance?
Outside my studio for a couple of years, about a year or so, I used to drive past this smashed up ambulance that was outside. It was just on the street. And I realized it was a part of an insurance claim. It was just such a tragic, but also, there was just so much paradox in the object, the smashed ambulance on the side of the road. I was like, I need that. I just decided that I needed to have that ambulance. So I make myself impossible projects. So I spent the next 3 years trying to get that ambulance, and it just becomes like this thorn in my side, and I just have to do it. And I just keep going until I get it. And and then I actually just took it to a car crushing place, which took a while as well. And then we crushed it back into the cube. Of course, there's a shout out to Chamberlain. Of course, there's all of that. But I feel like with this work, there's a tenderness to the work, which is why the wax piece comes next door to it, and the title Crush Breathless. It's an emotional roller coaster of a piece, and it was just made during a time where perhaps I needed to make the work.
No, I'm feeling that. Also, you are, it seems to me, just in the conversation that we're having, once you have an idea, you are incredibly determined to see that idea through.
Yeah. It's really, so I try, what the thing is, I don't tell you how many ideas I have. Some of them go through, some of them don't, but generally, no, I do. I like the challenge. You see, I love materials. And I think materials are there. And I'm not, when I'm making art, I'm not trying to make realities. I'm trying to understand that there's much more complexity than my mind and my eyes what can ever see. But material is matter. Okay, so and we can hold it and form it to make other things. So when I get an idea, and I think I also now have learned really to trust my intuition. So if I see that ambulance on the road and I say, that's what I need, because I know that's going to become a piece of work, then I just let it take its own time, because I'm already doing 7 other things anyway. So I just don't forget about it. It's like it just stays at the back of my mind. And I think form, like material. So I looked at the ambulance. It is material for me, and it's a sign. And I see them as signs that I need to decipher. And that then creates another space in the work. And, you talked earlier that, sometimes my work is very disparate, but the thing that links it all together is me. And, and there is paradox. And there is paradox in my work. But there's paradox in life. And, I don't think any of us live very singular. Well, I don't anyway. Singular lives. There's a lot of change. The way that we live, even as women, we are we have many roles. We are many people even in a day. I just click in and out of different roles when I need to be. I could be, I can be a daughter, then I can be a mother, and then I can be a wife, and then I'm an artist. I'm doing so many things in one day.
And according to Vogue India, you can be a punk from time to time.
Yes. Oh, okay. Why not?
Why not?
Why not?
I mean, I suspect for most visitors, the image they'll take away is of a piece called 6 Women, which is a plaster cast of real women, sex workers who are all paid by you and who you found in the red light area of Calcutta. They're all over the age of 40 and they're sitting, almost daring you to look at them as you walk in. They're quite unsettling. Was your choice of material, plaster, significant in the piece?
Yeah. Plaster's a really fantastic ancient material used by the Egyptians to make death masks. In 2010 or 11, I was in a residency at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and I came across Beethoven's Death Mask, and it was. I just thought it was amazing, and I was like. And then I started to read about death mask, but I had been looking at plaster. I'd already started earlier in the past few years before 2010. I was casting my friends when they were pregnant and their stomachs. Most of my girlfriends, because we were all in our early 30s, and lots of people having children. And I was casting everyone, all my friends who were having children. And then I would give them the cast as a gift. But I started to realize that this was a really beautiful transference, and that plaster, when it heats your body, all your pores open. And so there was this extraordinary transference, almost an essence of the body, a memory of the body that gets transferred, which is then, of course, when I looked at Beethoven's Death Mask, I realized, of course, this is what they want to do. This is what people have been doing, or artists have been doing for centuries. 6 Women. I wanted to know if the body cast of the sex worker said or spoke something more than the objecthood of the cast. So I was really interested in transfer of the essence, the smell, the sense, the actual personhood of the body. And was plaster a medium that could catch the essence of the person, and what did that mean? And could art then answer, could the material answer, and then the artwork answer the questions of ethics or exchange, for example? Because the work is very complex, and it was very difficult even for me to get my head around it. When I thought about the work in 2011, I actually didn't finish the work till the end of 2014, because I was constantly thinking about, what does exploitation mean? How would I, as a woman, transact financially with this other woman, and what did that mean? So when you see the work, these women are sitting with their eyes closed. They're very quiet, but they're really formidable. and their inner world is completely intact. And the space that's between them and me is both like, I suppose it's intimate, but it's also, we are so far apart at the same time. It's macrocosmically far away. And they're sort of really loud. They're screaming, these women, but they're also completely silent. So, material's not just about the emotional, physiological, psychological meanings, but it's also a lot of art. We refer back to the making of art, to the history of art. And in most of my works, like I sprout appendages, I add branches, I add narratives, I add things. I just keep adding and adding and adding. But in Six Women, we're functioning as a really classical form. Everything's closed off. All the orifices are closed. It's like an impenetrable wall, a facade. But at the same time, the work is anti-classical, just in the way that they're sitting on those trolleys. It's the studio. It's the studio casting. So they refer to classical art, but they're anti-classical. And the signs, their inner life is sort of almost in the same way that I use the plaster to take the impression of their skin and take the essence out. Their inner life seemed to be almost pouring out. They're seeping out of them from the plaster. And so I think that work speaks as much about what it excludes as what it contains, actually.
Interesting. For a piece like that, I mean, I've seen it in one environment. Does its power, impact, meaning change when it's in a different context?
I try really hard to keep that work alone in a room as much as I can. I'd like to show it in Calcutta. I'd like to show it in India, that work for sure, but I haven't shown it in India yet.
Interesting. Can I ask why not?
I don't know. Various reasons, cancelled exhibitions or COVID or, the various things that happened over the past 6 years.
Were you always destined to be an artist, Bharti? I know your sister went to art school too. Was there a lot of art and making in your household?
Yeah, my mum was she was always on the machine. She was a seamstress. She's always knitting. She's always doing things with her hands. And I think, honestly, as I said before, I kind of knew I wanted to be an artist since the age of about 6. I really did. It was like, this is what I wanted to do because I like making things. And so I realized very early on when I made things, I felt really happy. I felt very proud. And there was a huge sense of achievement and joy at creating things that other people just didn't seem to get that much fun out of. But it made me really happy. And as I said, I just had an art teacher who opened a door for me and I walked through. And the art room was my sanctuary, and it was always open. And I just knew I was going to go to art school. That's what I was going to do, and that's what I did.
You grew up in Epsom.
Yeah.
I'm guessing there weren't too many faces of colour in that area in the 70s and 80s.
No.
Well, your parents only arrived a couple of years before you were born. How did the family end up in the suburbs?
My father, when they came to the UK, they moved to the East End, and they were there for a few years. And he managed to, he came to the UK like most immigrants, with not knowing anyone, made his own way, and became successful as a textile merchant, and decided that he wanted to move to the suburbs. I mean, the suburbs were, the suburbs were tough growing up in the 70s. Sure, yeah. As a young Asian person. There was literally no one, there were hardly any people of color at all. And it was both challenging, but also a great learning. I don't think, unless I'd gone to this sort of girls' school in Banstead, I don't even know if I'd have had the opportunity to find someone in my life. It was almost a kind of destiny. I believe that I found a true vocation at school because the art room was, we were doing just the most amazing things. We were life drawing at the age of 9, and we were developing black and white films in dark rooms and making mobiles and looking at Hieronymus Bosch. And understanding and talking about Goya and Velasquez and painting and doing silk screens and doing lino cuts and wood cuts. And, we were not allowed to draw in anything except biro and wax pencils for about 2.5 years. And we worked on the, most rubbish paper with but it was always this thing that you can make art from everything and anything. And I think my dexterity with material is really from that very young learning, was that there is no such thing as a mistake in art. You can always remake anything. Don't get precious about your work. If it falls over, just make something else, because he used to do this thing at school where, you do your best drawing ever, and you felt so good about it because it was like your best life drawing of a rope. And, I remember he would just sit down at your chair and you'd be like, oh no, here he goes. And he would just take a bottle of ink and pour it over your drawing and say, yeah, and say, right. And then you'd look at him and you'd be like, I think I'm going to cry. And but he would take then a sharp instrument, and then he would do, he would like scratch the black ink off and do sort of like dry point and take white paint, which is, I still draw like that. When I make a drawing, I use paint, watercolor, acrylic, wax, pencil, felt tip pen. Anything and everything I can get my hands on, I'll use it in a drawing. There's just no purity in the way that I use material at all.
Interesting. So it was always going to be art, and you did a fine art course in Newcastle. When you finished that, was it true that you were kind of weighing up whether to go to New Delhi or New York, and you tossed a coin and it ended up being New Delhi? That's a true story?
It's really a true story. Because I came back to London and I was 19 years old, the YBAs were just taking off in the UK. I kind of felt like I didn't really have a place, or there was no place for me there because I didn't have anything to say.
Is that because you're a painter? Definitely
because I was a painter, but also just the nature of the work. And I wasn't ready. I had nothing to say. I'll be really honest. I was not ready. And painting was really not it was not a good thing to do in the 90s, in the late 90s for sure. So I decided that I was not going to do an MA, and that maybe it was time for me to go somewhere. So I stayed in London for a year and had a studio and worked, and found it utterly depressing. And had a job as well, and then decided I needed to get out of London because, I don't know, I just had a really strong sense that I just needed to leave, and something was calling, and I just thought, okay, shall I go to New York? Yeah, New York will be great. And then I thought, well, maybe I should go to India because I've never sort of been to India since I was 4 years old. Maybe I should go and meet my grandmother. So I was like, okay, quickly. And I was like, I can do both, can't I? Thinking that I could do one and then the other. So I ended up in Delhi and never came back.
Do you ever consider what your work might have looked like had the coin landed on the other side? Kind of counterfactual history.
I do get asked this question quite a bit. I think it's because I tell people of my coin tossing escapade. It's a rhetorical question, isn't it? How can I answer that question? I have no idea. What if? Of course, I would not be using the bindis. I would not be making works with the sari, but maybe I would. Who knows?
No, fair enough.
But I doubt. Honestly, I doubt it. I wouldn't. Maybe I would have still been a painter. I think, yeah. I learned to make sculpture in India because I could. Because I could get people to help me, and there was no hierarchy here. So, there was at college and stuff, there was a lot of hierarchy in the sculpture workshops. It was a really blokey thing.
Right, that's interesting. I'm guessing you haven't actually said this, but I'm guessing you felt like a bit of an outsider in Epsom. And I'm just wondering, when you arrived in India in 92, 93, whether you felt like an outsider when you arrived. You didn't speak Hindi when you arrived, I think.
No, I think the outsider is sort of an outlier kind of an image. And I think to be slightly displaced, I think a lot of artists are anyway. You're always outside looking in that way. I think, I went to Newcastle. That was pretty. That was an amazing 3 years of my life as well. I got to spend the first sort of time out of London and see what the rest of the UK was like, and I spent a lot of time traveling around the UK and seeing parts of North England and Scotland and driving around in my 2CV all across the country. And I had a marvelous time, but it taught me a lot. And I think that if I hadn't experienced Newcastle, I wouldn't have been tough enough to come and live in India, because I was tough by the time I came out of Newcastle. And then India just felt, I can do this. And yes, I did feel although I'm Indian and I look very Punjabi, and nobody looks at me in India and asks me really where I'm from. It's only when I would speak, they'd be like, oh, hold on a minute. But I think I kind of now, I don't really think about it that much. I can be anywhere I want. That's how I like to live. And that's how I like to think of myself, that I can, anywhere where I want to put my studio down, I can put a studio down and I can make work, because the work is in me. And I think the way that you interact with the world changes as you get older anyway. And I'm not 22 years old anymore. I'm 55. And so I interact very differently. And whatever I need is within me. My studio comes with me wherever I am. And whether I'm outside or inside, it really doesn't matter. And I think even in my work, you can see it. And that's why I go inside and outside, and it's all around. And there's a real fluidity in the way that I use material, and I address or look at the body in terms of casting, marking, attaching, accruing, all of it. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does, I think. Can we talk slightly more practically about the art market, or the space for art in India? Has it changed since 92? Is there a different kind of appreciation of the work you're producing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been slow, and it has room for a lot of growth, but there are great galleries here now who work with artists. Collectors are growing. Appreciation for the arts has changed a lot, and there's a massive growth spurt in India right now. You can, and so people have. It's just very different. It's very different, obviously, than New York or say London. But when I came to India in the 90s, I remember just feeling really excited, because it felt like you could just do anything you wanted. You could be anyone. If you wanted to, if you said, you could just say, I'm an artist. And everyone like, yeah, great, you're an artist. I'm a filmmaker. Really? How many films have you made? None. Okay, you're a filmmaker. You could, it was almost like the 60s in London, and you could just be anything and be anyone. And there was space and there was a lot of scope to work. But at the time, there was also Delhi is the intellectual capital of India. And there were amazing people here. We would, you'd spend, night after night talking with other artists, filmmakers, thinkers, writers, intellectuals. It was just really, it was like a time of great growth and change, and India was opening up, and it felt very exciting to be here. And it felt like a place of huge possibility, but also to be a young person in this sort of energized, crazy, dynamic city, which Delhi still is. It is a completely crazy place, but there is an energy here.
Yeah. And you met your husband.
Yes.
Very early on, Subodh Gupta, shortly after arriving in New Delhi. Bharti, I have to tell you, I'm always fascinated by couples who do the same thing, mainly because my parents both work together or used to work together. How does it work? Do you talk about art the whole time? Are you very competitive? Do you not talk about it?
Yeah, we talked about art all the time, and we do still talk about art a lot. Sometimes I wonder if we're a bit tedious actually to other people. But yes, we think, make, talk, shop about what we like. And the best part is when we do go and see things or shows together, we kind of have very similar tastes in what we respond to. And if we don't, then there's a really long discussion about what I'm missing or what you're missing. We share a lot in terms of our studio practice. He's always the first person who I say, can you have a look at this for me? What do you think? And then he'll say, I don't know. And I'm like, I didn't ask you anyway. So generally we do that to each other. If we sort of say, not sure, they're like, well, I don't care what you think. It's fine. Go away. I think we're quite funny actually. But yeah, we've known each other for 30 years. And when we first met, it was really, really intense. But I think one thing that we've always managed to do is have separate studios. And our practices are quite separate, very different as well, in fact. But I suppose we're very supportive of each other.
And was it always an ambition to be an international artist? Did you have kind of written on the back of a cigarette packet or whatever people do when they are mapping out their lives?
Yeah, there's dreams. You have those. I remember the first time we went to Paris, and you're 22 years old. You don't have any money. You're eating a cheese sandwich on the Seine, and we walk to the Pompidou, and we sit down outside the Pompidou, and we both looked at each other, and we said, "We're going to have a show there one day." And we're like, "Yeah." And we shook hands, and we were like, "Right, done." And we would make these. Yeah, we've done. I think at some point after the birth of my son, I was 28 years old. And I really wasn't actually working that much, to be perfectly honest. I thought if I had made 2 works a year, I was doing really well. And if I went to the post office in a day, I'd done a really massive job. Well done. And I remember my son being born, and I remember just thinking, right, grow up. And what do you want to do? And I think he was a catalyst, actually, in some ways for me anyway. And I gave myself in my head, I suppose, I said, Bharti Kher, you've got till you're 34 to do something. I'm giving you 6 years. And I just decided that I was going to work really hard and make art and think. I think art's not just about the making, although like we're talking on this show about the making. And now it's almost like a second nature that you just go in. But the first years are really about thinking and making, and then just making without thinking, but definitely trying to work out what you're doing, creating a language for yourself, building your library of sources, building your encyclopedia of references, and trying to hone in on the things that you're interested in that are really congruent to your inner self. And I think for me, that's been really important, that I connect with my inner self to make the things that I really want to make, that make me say to myself, yes, that's what I wanted to do. I don't want to respond ad hoc to whatever is, say, fashionable today or tomorrow or whatever. It's about really what you have to do for yourself, because your voice is very singularly your own.
Yeah. So in other words, you weren't considering the market at any stage, because there is like a pivotal piece, I think in 2006, The Skin Speaks a Language Not Its Own, which is of a sleeping or dying elephant made in fiberglass, covered in white bindis, which seems very important. But you didn't have a sense that, this is going to work well in New York or anything like that.
No. Honestly, for the first, I think India was in some ways great, because it allowed me from the years of, 1997 till about 2006. So 9 years, it allowed me to make a load of really bad work, and nobody looked at it anyway. So it didn't make any difference. And although all those works are sort of I've kept everything. I mean, you keep everything because maybe one day you'll think, oh, wow, no, it's not, it's okay. But there was no market. There was no money, and we got by doing sort of commercial commissions, odd jobs. I even taught for a while. I mean, I even did like classes for the local kids and taught them how to do painting. We just...
You didn't pour ink all over their work?
Well, I did actually. They loved my classes. I'd say, right, we're doing self-portraits today. And I would like, go, come on, we'll scribble all over your painting. And they'd get really upset, but they got used to it after a while. They were like, she's mad. Well, I don't know. Yeah, there was no inclination. I don't think you can work like that if you have to make your work, and then you can find your way somehow. I don't really know. The way finds you, or you find your way. I'm not sure, but it doesn't go the other way around. Well, it didn't go for that way for me.
Yeah. Bharti, our time is essentially up. I've taken up a lot of your evening. I guess you're in New Delhi now. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Final question is about the future. You've obviously got this show coming up at the Southbank. What's going on in your studio at the moment? What can we expect coming up soon?
New sculpture. I came out of Yorkshire just going, I've got to go down to the studio and make new sculptures. So I have a load of things that I have no idea what they are. And that's for me a really good start, because there'll be something sooner or later.
Very good. Well, that's very mysterious. I like that. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that, Bharti. That was a great hour of my life. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Mutual. Thank you so much for your time, Grant.
Bharti Kher, Alchemies, runs at Yorkshire Sculpture Park until April 2025. Go see. And you can find out more about Bharti at bhartikher.com. And remember, the Material Matters Fair runs from the 18th to the 21st of September at Barge House, Oxo Tower Wharf. Admission is free for trade, but you must register in advance. I'll put a link in the blurb that comes with this episode. As ever, to find other podcasts I've done and sign up to our newsletter, go to materialmatters.design. And there are images relating to the interviews on our Instagram page, which is also materialmatters.design. And it would make me incredibly happy if you went to my Patreon page and made a pledge at patreon.com/Material Matters. For as little as £2.50 a month, you can receive an invite to various Material Matters events, as well as getting access to each episode before it's published to the wider world. Material Matters is a completely independent concern, and any help you can offer would be hugely appreciated. Ultimately, you'll be helping to take the message, the importance of materials, skill, craft and design to a whole new audience. Thanks very much for listening, and hope to see you soon.